Well, hello there, and welcome to another tank review. I'm Corny Swiss, and today I'll be reviewing the Pz.Kpfw 8 Maus, a rank 5 8.0 battle rating German heavy tank. And now, as with all reviews, if there's something in particular you want to see, like the realistic gameplay or the simulator gameplay, or maybe just the final opinion, all that information, all the timestamps are down below, so feel free to go click off to wherever you want to go to watch whatever you want to watch. Now, if you want to hear the garage portion of this review, let's get started. So, the Maus is another one of these end-of-war German super heavy super weapons, I guess. It's classified as a super heavy tank. It's, I believe, I'm pretty sure it's got to be the heaviest armored fighting vehicle created, with the intent of, like using it. It's 188 tons. It's really, really heavy. It has a 120 horsepower engine at 3,000 RPM. That's a lot of grunt in the engine, but like I said, it's really heavy. And that was the main thing that the Maus struggled with. At the end of the war in 1944, they finished the first... Okay, little backstory. 2 hulls were finished. So, the hull portions were finished and given motors. 1 turret was finished and put onto the second prototype hull. Right, the first prototype hull never received a turret from the Germans. These tanks, when these tanks were moved from their factory to like testing grounds, they used the first prototype as like a generator and an extra engine for the second prototype to help it move through like mud and things like that. And it was a sort of a tandem team system. Now, ultimately, what would happen to these tanks is they would attempt to be destroyed by the Germans, and charges were placed inside the tank. Now, the second prototype that had the turret equipped ended up suffering a lot of hull damage because the turret contained the blast, but the turret was, for the most part, intact. The first prototype, the one without the turret, received very little hull damage because the explosion was able to escape out through where the turret should have been. So when Russian forces captured these machines, they used a bunch of German half-tracks to pull the turret off of the second prototype and put it onto the first prototype, fixed it up, sent it back to Russia, tested it, and then put it in a tank museum where it sits today. But the Maus was designed to be this super-duper heavy weapon to break through Russian and American and British, well, just Allied advance, and stop the advance and then push forward with infantry support and turn the tide of the war, because there really wasn't a gun that could penetrate this thing. And that's almost accurate in War Thunder. The Maus we have in the game has probably the most armor possible to put on a tank and still have it move. Another interesting side note, the Maus was too heavy to conceivably cross bridges. So the original design was that the Maus could be sort of buttoned up and run on an electric motor to cross the riverbeds. And it had a snorkel to provide oxygen to the crew that was 45 feet long. So it could go through a 45-foot river by just basically crawling under it. The idea being that the first prototype, the one without the turret, would act as sort of a generator. The Mauses would be like in tandem, and one would send more power to the engine, to the electric motors of the other one, and then vice versa when it was time for the second one to cross. Obviously a very difficult task. But it's a very, very heavy tank, so you had to figure out something, right? The Maus we have in the game can reach a listed top speed of 21 kilometers per hour. I've never seen it get above 20 on its own. Matter of fact, I can't remember seeing it get to 21, but it might have. You will get to 20 relatively quickly, honestly. But you won't go any... 21 is the hard cap. You will never exceed 21. It's ridiculously slow as tanks go in War Thunder. I almost said World of Tanks. Maximum inclination 41 degrees. I don't believe that, because there has been situations where I haven't been able to climb slopes in this thing. But it might just be because I didn't have enough run-up to do it. Turret rotation speed of 8 degrees a second. That's really slow. But then again, this turret is hella heavy and hella armored. So that's not surprising. Vertical guidance, 7 degrees of depression, 23 degrees of elevation. That's fairly standard for the German tanks. It's got a little less gun depression, but it is a much bigger gun, and I believe that's similar gun depression and elevation to the Jagdtiger, which has the same gun in it. So the breech of the gun limits its up and downward trajectories, and also just the front of the tank. You know, you only can go so far here. But let's move on to what a lot of people are going to be really excited about, the armor. And you won't be disappointed. From the front, this tank has 200 millimeters of sort of hull armor, upper and lower plate. The lower plate is not a weak spot. Now, at its thinnest, this armor is effectively 280 millimeters thick because it's constructed at 55 degree slope, and the lower plate is constructed at 35 degree slope. So, but it still maintains about 280 millimeters of armor. Now, on average, this tank will be somewhere around 300 millimeters of frontal armor. That's insane, right? You just won't penetrate that. So, and it covers all the important components of the tank, right? It doesn't cover these parts because that's where the tracks are, right? The tracks actually run under the machine because it has all these side skirts over here that cover the tracks. So the tracks basically act as more armor. And, as it should. Let's find a use. Let's put more armor on this thing. Front of the turret, 220 millimeters. Very strong turret. And it is angled and sloped and stuff. But it does have one big weakness. So 220 millimeters of relatively flat armor is not a huge deal. It's a lot. But it can be dealt with from the front at reasonable ranges. By primarily German tanks, but some American tanks as well. It does have the advantage of being curved, right? So as you go up, it gets ridiculously thick, and as you go down, it gets ridiculously thick. The issue is that the bottom part of this turret can act as a shot trap. See how it's angled down? It's just like on the Porsche turreted Tiger II and on the Panther D, where it has that shot trap. Something else to keep in mind about this turret, before I go on and talk more about the armor zones, is that although it is very thick, notice what's directly under it. It's the engine deck, alright? And when we look at the layout, there's ammo here and here. So you can actually be knocked out from the front by a ricochet down into your engine deck, which is not good. But let's continue on with the front of the turret here. Oops. So we have the main turret face, which covers a good portion of the tank. Right? Then we have a gun mantlet, which overlaps with the turret face a good amount, and that's 240 millimeters. So you won't ever penetrate this gun mantlet because behind it is basically 220 millimeters most places, and it's 240 millimeters up front, and it's sloped. It's going to be difficult. And then where the gun mantlet, this gun mantlet doesn't cover, you have this ring here that's 100 millimeters, but effectively in excess of 300 everywhere. Except for on the very edges, but that's also covered by behind the gun mantlet it sits on top of. So penetrating the gun mantlet of this tank is basically impossible. You have a ring right around the socket that the gun fits in that's 300 millimeters of armor, and it's constructed, it's thin, it's in excess of 500 millimeters of armor. So shooting the gun mantlet of this tank will not do the job. There's too much armor. It's overlapping. It's just too hard. If you want to knock this thing out from the front, the best choice is the left cheek, if you're looking directly at it, because behind that is some ammo. Right here, that's where some crew members sit, and the ammo back in there, but ammo is front and center here, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the layout. But let's go to the side armor. Side of the turret, 200 millimeters except for these holes, which are 220. There's one on the opposite side, and then there's also a little section in the front, you can see it there, and then a hole in the back that's also 220 millimeters. Now, sides, rear of the turret are 200 millimeters. It means this turret can be angled very, very effectively to protect the weaker, quote-unquote, weaker sections of the front of the turret. Because they're not weak at all. This still takes a lot to get through, but it's not as strong as the other portions. You can angle the turret something like this, for example. This is in excess of 500. This is 240, 250, so you can get away with even more. Now this is 280. This is 360, all the way back to 500-ish. So this would be unpenetrable for every tank in the game. All right. Now, the side skirts. You have an upper skirt, which is 180 millimeters, and that's actually the side of the tank, right? Below that, you have another skirt that's 100 millimeters, but that doesn't include the tracks, which sit behind it, and all the track wheels here, and the suspension and stuff like that, which is 30 millimeters of armor, effectively, with all these wheels. So, and then on top of that, you have the interior portion of the tank here, which is 80 millimeters, and that runs along the entire bottom of the tank. So you basically have to get to 2 layers of armor in excess of 200 millimeters. So that'll be rough. The upper skirt is 180 millimeters, and it does sit on the tank, so that's your best bet, honestly. Shooting in the lower part, not going to get the job done. Rear of the tank, 150 millimeters. It's the weakest part of the tank. You know, this is where the ZSU is going to pen you if it is. And 150 millimeters is no laughing matter. So, you know, this tank is extremely well armored. Now, angling also works for the side armor. You know, this 180 is now in excess of 300, and these lower skirts are, the outer skirt is 200 by itself, plus, you know, the addition of all the wheels and then the bit of armor in the middle. It's angled like this, the mouse is unpenetrable to most machines, and the machine that can knock it out uses HE shells. That's the ISU 152. I've had success against mouses by hitting the face of their turret with an HE shell and having the shell go down through their engine deck. And before I forget, there is also a bunch of armor plates on the inside of the tank. I'll highlight it here because it's the only way you can really see it. All those plates you see there are 20 millimeters thick. Now, it's not an incredible amount, but you notice how they're sort of segmenting the tank. And it means the penetration from the front is not likely to actually continue on to the rest of the crew. And a penetration from the side is not likely to gut the tank from, you know, from the side or from stem to stern, or bow or starboard to port, or vice versa. So these little plates actually have some purpose. Even if they are only 20 millimeters, they do serve to contain a penetrating hit. All right. And, you know, obviously the same thing applies to the other side. If you can angle this as well. So the mouse, it's just like in World of Tanks where the mouse lived and died by its angling. This tank lives and dies by its angling. It's, when you angle it, it's impenetrable except to, you know, heavy duty, high explosive shells. And you can sit here all day long and just, you know, laugh at the enemy as they try and penetrate your armor. So it has tons and tons of armor, which is good, which is great. Let's talk about the gun, right? Because the gun is a tank with tons of armor, but not a great gun is a difficult tank to use. Let's talk about the coaxial 75mm first, because obviously I start with the smaller gun. When you first get the tank, you have an HE shell and a heat shell. Heat shell has 80mm penetration all ranges, 450 meters per second muzzle velocity. The HE shell, 12mm of penetration, 570 meters per second muzzle velocity. Now, my opinion on low caliber HE shells is probably beaten to death by now, but I don't like 75mm high explosive shells. I don't think they're that good, especially not at this rank. A heat shell will do the job, and this is an 80mm. It doesn't have good muzzle velocity though, and the coaxial machine gun, yeah, 75mm gun can't actually turn the turret. The ability to turn the turret resides with the 128mm gun. So the 75 is kind of, it's in an iffy spot. You have an upgraded ammunition that gives you 100mm of penetration, which is why it's not completely useless. I mean, the 80 can get the job done for the side of tanks, but this at least gives you some leeway. Now, the way I've always used it is it's harassment. It's damaging components of tanks when my main gun is reloading, and it's only really been useful to me at very close range, because the muzzle velocity prevents you from really gauging distance properly, and you need to be in the 128mm gun's sight to move the turret, and you really need to move the turret when you're engaging targets. Now, what I have been able to do is line up the shot, switch to the gun, you know, do elevation right, and knock out like AI and things like that. Or you could do it to a heavily disabled tank. But the 128mm gun is way, way more effective, so a lot of times you're just using this to harass while your main gun reloads. Now, the main gun It's the same gun you get on the Jagdtiger, 128mm Pz.Kpfw. This is the heavy tank version of the Pak-44, which is the Jagdtiger's gun. You start off with this armor-piercing shell. Has an explosive damaging effect, which is nice. It's a capped shell, so it has a squared-off front. It gives it a little bit more stickiness, I'll call it, or normalization, I think, that than the other shell. Now, the HE shell, we'll talk about the HE shell first. 28 kilogram HE shell. That's a pretty hefty shell. Generally, though, I generally don't fire the HE shell. I can understand why it would be useful, though. Hitting the side of an IS-4 with this shell, you can hit ammo racks if the shell hits the side of the turret and then goes down. The downside is, though, it's not at 8.0 battle rating. You really need a higher caliber than 128, 122mm HE shells to do the job a lot of times, in my experience. Now, for the side of T-54s, this will probably do them in. For the side of, light tanks, this will do them in. But alternatively, the side of those tanks, you can also get them done with the AP shell, just as good, right? And this AP shell is pretty good. 28.3 kilogram shell, 930 meters per second muzzle velocity. 240 millimeters penetration at 10 meters, 220 at 500. 175 at 1500 and 167 at 2000 meters. So you can basically penetrate most things at most ranges. Now IS-4s are going to be tough, but then again the IS-4 can't actually penetrate you at the ranges that you can't penetrate him. If that makes any sense. So basically you both have to close on each other. Now the upgraded AP shell, which is a armor-piercing capped ballistic shell, also has the explosive damaging effect. 28.3 kilograms, 930 meters per second muzzle velocity, armor penetration of 255 millimeters at 10 meters, 235 at 500, 185 at 1500, and 177 at 2000 meters. Now, the advantage is it just has better penetration across all ranges, so that's why you honestly want to use it. It's still an AP shell, so it's still going to explode inside the tank at this rank, because it's not like you're going to over penetrate with this AP shell. A lot of the targets you're shooting at are gonna set this shell off. And this is the shell you want to use once you get it. You want to use it because it's a good one. It does make a noticeable difference. I can't exactly pin down why, but there is a significant difference between this shell and the previous shell. Now, the extra bit of penetration is probably a big factor, but also I think the shape of the shell for some reason just works better against some tanks. Now, this shell is still going to struggle with IS-4s frontally at medium-long range, but then again, the IS-4 isn't going to kill you at medium-long range through your tank. So you both have to close in on each other, and there's other tanks that have higher penetration that work with the mouse that you can kill IS-4s with. Now, if you get the side of it, he's toast. If you get the rear of it, he's toast. So, but that's kind of the same for you. The IS-4 is a very big, heavy gun, but the difference is that you can penetrate his side armor at any range. He can't penetrate your side armor at any range. There will be a range where he cannot hurt you, but you can still hurt him. So there is some gamesmanship there to be played there. And that's one thing that the mouse has going for it that the Jagdtiger doesn't. It has a turret, and it has armor everywhere. So this tank is way more flexible. It's the same gun. Mine has a better reload for some reason. I don't know if that's necessarily because of the tank, but you look at my Jagdtiger, this crew is better and is 23.4 second reload rate. My mouse has 22.3. And this Jagdtiger crew is better than this mouse crew. So something to be there. I don't know if that's necessarily a bug or not, because you'd think that the guns would be the same, would have the same rate of fire, but something to keep in mind. Now, as I was saying, the mouse has the advantage of having a turret and just being more flexible. So everything a Jagdtiger can do, a mouse can do, and but not everything a mouse can do, a Jagdtiger can do. So the mouse is kind of, the flexibility just makes it a way better tank than the Jagdtiger. Now, let's look at the layout though and see maybe some of the weaknesses though. So when I pull up the layout, you can see a couple interesting things. One, you see these big cans at the back. The mouse actually has, the transmission has motors, individual electric motors that run the tracks. So the tracks are actually run through these electric motors separate of the engine, meaning that the mouse can actually turn fairly well and can actually, well, it turns well in neutral, but those rotors need to like start pushing, you know. There's a little bit of time where it's like sort of getting in gear to push, and then once it starts pushing, the tank really turns side to side. Right? Now, when you're moving, a lot of times you find that you have to almost come to a complete stop to turn the tank, which is annoying, but, you know, it is 188 tons. Layout, you have fuel tanks in the front portion of the tank, and you have a driver and what is a machine gunner, but historically I believe this is an assistant driver, someone to help this guy out. Behind them, you have the engine with the radiators, and behind the engine, you have the big old transmission, which runs the entire bottom length of the tank from basically under the turret. Now, you will notice that there is butt tons of ammo. All in the back of the turret, there's ammo. In the side here, you have casings for the 128mm gun. In the right side, you have the 75mm gun's ammo. And this is what I was talking about before. If you can penetrate the left cheek of the mouse, this is ammo, and this will detonate, and this will knock the tank out. Alternatively, if you were to fire, say, an HE shell at the front of this tank and it hit the front of the turret, a lot of times the shell fragments, it goes in here and knocks, you know, busts the radiator, busts the engine, hits a fuel tank, sometimes hits this ammo here. Obviously there's no ammo to hit here if you hit them on this side, but you still have the radiator, engine, fuel tanks, and a lot of times that shell will cause the fuel tanks to explode and knock the tank out, or at least set him on fire and break everything in his tank. If you're shooting him from this side, a lot of times you can hit this ammo with the explosive shell, and if you hit the front of the turret, and it'll knock the tank out. Hitting the side skirt, however, won't do anything. Hitting too high on the front of the turret won't do anything. Hitting the side of the turret won't do anything. You have to hit the face. And if you know you're about to take a hit from a ISU 152 8 firing HE, not a bad idea to turn the turret completely to the side, facing him, and give him basically a full broadside. Because from that point on, the turret is now sort of over on the edge of the tank, and the explosive shell won't hit the ammo rack when it hits the turret. So you have a chance. Now, crew member locations to continue. You have a gunner here, you have the loader behind him, you have a commander, and then another loader. And obviously it takes two loaders, because look how massive this gun is in here. It takes up the entire compartment. It's a two-piece loading system, so two loaders are necessary. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that a penetrating hit into the turret a lot of times will knock this tank out from an AP shell. You'll kill 4 of the 6 crew members, which is unfortunate. And also there's just butt tons of ammo in here. So getting the side of the turret, it is still 200mm though, so you have to watch out for that. But like I said, best way to knock this thing out from the front, right here, this ammo storage here. If you can hit that, you will destroy the tank most of the time. Shooting the lower plate here is not a weak spot. It's the same thickness essentially as the upper plate. Right, so these fuel tanks and the driver and the machine gunner, quote-unquote machine gunner, are completely safe here. The best case scenario is to penetrate the left side of the turret or the right side of the turret and hit the gunner and the loader, but you won't likely hit the ammo at the back. All right, and if you get the full broadside of the tank, either here or here will do the job. Or here if you want to set it on fire, but a lot of times just going here will explode the tank really nice. So that's the layout of the mouse. And the big thing I want you to take away from this is the mouse is fills a role now in the 8.0 battle rating block. It's a tank that goes forward. You don't really want to sit back and snipe with the mouse. You can, and you can be just as effective as a Jagdtiger doing it. The issue is it's so slow that a lot of times if it's like a cap zone, you need to keep rolling towards the cap zone. And you have the armor to effectively deal with threats, while the tanks that don't have the effective armor can help you. Like King Tiger 105s, Panther 2s, Jagdtigers to some degree, because they can't Their side armor is so weak that they can't go forward really. The mouse can go forward, and that should be your goal in this tank, to push the objectives with your team. And by team I mean supporting tanks like King-Tigers and other mouses. Push the objective, drive it home, and then let your other tanks just deal with the flanking enemies, or just deal with the enemies that you can. And this 128mm gun can deal with a lot of things. So with all that being said, let's move on to the replay, shall we? So here we are in a simulator battle on Jungle. And Jungle is not a bad map for the mouse. It's not a great one for a couple reasons. There's a lot of terrain you got to deal with. And, you know, I kind of gave that T-26 a little bit more than his AI self wanted. But I joined this game a little late. And my plan, had I joined this game on time, my plan would have been to advance over towards the hill across the bridge and then duke it out over there and eventually win. However, that got maybe put on hold because there are enemy tanks in the center. Bounced a shell off the front of the T-54 model 1947. And that's not unreasonable. It has a thick turret face and it's very difficult to get a solid hit on it. But he bounced his shell off me as well. Now my goal is I want to push over here to the bottom of the sort of center hill, because the enemies seem to have a sizable number of tanks here, and if we can push them out of there, then Allied tanks can push across the beach and have a better chance of outflanking whatever forces are engaged on the hill. So another hit. I hit his gun first. I think if I'd hit him to the right, a little bit more to the right, I think I could have knocked him out there, but hit his gun, not the end of the world. But I'm going to keep moving forward. The mouse is a tank that if you want to get somewhere, you need to just keep moving forward. You can't stop all that often to sit down and trade shots if you're trying to get somewhere. But the mouse is very, very good at sitting down and trading shots, so not the end of the world if you have to. And from what's happening on the map, we have tanks almost to their spawn in the southern portion of the map. We have a couple tanks holding the sort of the bridge sort of area. But with a little bit of backup, we're going to push forward to sort of the base of this hill and push them out, keep them out of this middle island bit, and then push on to their spawn in the cap. And that T-54 is still over here. So I'm just trying to find a shot. There it is. But, you know, bounced off the side of his turret. And T-54 turrets are very tough. Generally you want to go for the hull, but you can kill a T-54 through the turret with the mouse. It is very doable. But you also need to watch out because a T-54 can penetrate the front of the mouse's turret with the old top ammunition. I say that, the B417D if I'm not mistaken. The new ammunitions can certainly penetrate the front of a mouse's turret, but it only works from very, you know, close ranges, not super long ranges. It won't have a chance. But I've come up over here and there's a friendly Jagdtiger sitting in the sort of riverbed there. And he's going to start pushing forward, which is sort of the impetus for me to start pushing forward as well. Because if the Jagdtiger's going forward, I probably need to go forward as well. I'm looking for that T-54. I want to kill him before I move forward, but it looks like I'm going to have to anyway. And the Jagdtiger actually nails I believe he nailed an IS-4, and then a T-54 got knocked out somewhere else. And I'm kind of at a loss right here because the Jagdtiger's moving forward, which is, I don't think, a good idea for him. It would be much better if I was the one moving forward, but while he's moving forward, it's very likely that a T-54 or something of that nature is going to come out of the woodwork and try and flank him. So it's important for me to be here so that if they do try that, I'll be able to do something about it. Now this T-54 was in a decent position until he started backing up and exposing more and more of his front plate. Because now I have a decent chance, you know, not great, but a few of his crew members are dead, which is nice. it was good of him to keep backing up, because if he hadn't kept backing up, I could have hit his upper glacis and likely penetrated. And now we're joined by another mouse. You'll find a lot of mouse when you play around in the 8.0. If you're in a game where you can see 8.0s, and you'll probably see some mouse. It's a very popular tank right now. And honestly, for a good reason. It's a good tank. It's something the Germans have been sorely lacking at the 8.0 battle rating for a very long time. And of course I can't climb that slope. I was hoping I could, because I want to get up over there. I believe the T-54 is still dug in there, and that other mouse is actually going forward, going around to start engaging him. So I'm turning the hull to go up around the other way. And there's something to be said. The mouse actually doesn't have a bad hull traverse, but that's partly because, like I said in the garage portion, it has those electric motors who are designed to move the tracks, so it actually has decent track traverse. Just looking, there's that T-54. Ooh, I can't quite, I see him, but I can't, my gun sight isn't going to be able to get him. And that mouse is going to start moving up on him, so I need to stop putting my nose into this hill here, because I was trying to get elevation so I could shoot down on him, but now I need to turn the hull and climb over this little hill and get after him. And the mouse, like I said before, does not turn well. In neutral it turns fine, and low gear, and when you're not moving it turns fine, but when you're moving, you basically have to come to a stop. It's just very difficult to move this thing. Except though I will say I was surprised that shell bounced, by the way. But then again, I wanted it to go into the side of his hull. In neutral and in very low gears, this tank turns fine. It's slow, but it's not bad. And in upper gears, the only turn you can get is if it like power slides. But that T4 met its end. Nice 128mm shell to the rear of the tank. And now I would like to just keep pushing forward. I want to push across this bridge, try and clear out their cap, or clear out their spawn, and then move to the cap. And hopefully if there's anyone... Oh, enemy tanks over there. Gonna have to watch out for them. And I probably could have decided to go over the bridge, but ultimately I'm going to decide to drop down into this little ditch and go through that way. Partly because my tank was looking a little dirty. Need a little bit of a clean. And also I don't want to get stuck on the bridge. It's just, for some reason, I always just feel a little worried about just bridges in general. So I'm going to turn the tank and drop down and go out the other side through this little river embankment. Funny, I think it is funny though, the mouse wasn't actually designed to go over bridges because it's just too heavy. So instead they designed it to be able to submerge and use a partner to give it electrical power to move the tank, and just basically crawl along the bottom and use a giant snorkel for air for the crew. I think that's kind of funny. It's ingenious, it's a good idea because the tank is too heavy, but would I do it? Probably not. And there's a T-54. I don't think he's actually spotted me. And yeah, rip T-54. Not the best situation to find yourself in. But now I'm going to start moving towards the cap, because we're getting to the latter stages of the game, and it's unlikely that the enemy will be bringing in more tanks. So I feel reasonably safe turning my back to the cap circle. Not the cap circle, sorry, the spawn. But, you know, the mouse said plenty of times it's not fast. It's pretty slow. It's really slow, in fact. That, like, the enemy have gone towards our cap, and I kind of had the sense that there was a T-54 heading there, but, like, there's zero reason for me to turn around and go back there. I'm never, ever going to get there. Even with how long the cap takes in this game mode, in the battle game mode. I would never make it. It's just too slow. But myself and another mouse are moving into their cap. And we have some tanks who are in position to deal with a threat to our cap. And there is a T-54 who's hiding out up here slightly to the right of my gun. Maybe, I don't know, 200 meters up there. I'm going to move through the cap, and I'm actually going to decide to sort of aggressively pursue him. I do have support. There's another mouse behind me, and together we can definitely take him. Now, solo it's debatable, because if I fire and don't kill him or disable him, it's very likely that he could just run up beside me and pump a shell into the side of my tank, which would probably knock me out. Unless I got lucky. So I'm going to slowly, not by choice, push over this hill and start looking for him. Now, I'm coming at him kind of angled. My goal was for him to actually fire, and because I'm pretty confident in bouncing his first shell. So my goal was for him to fire and then thus give away his position, because it's difficult for me to spot him, especially with, you know, Soviet tank painting in all this like shrubbery and stuff. But he's going to poke around that little corner right in front of me, and he's actually, I believe he's going to take a shot, and it's going to completely bounce because, yep, there it is. But now I know exactly where he is, and I know he's reloading at the moment, and I can just see the top of his turret there. So I'm trying to back up, hit the front of his turret, and go for a disabling shot. And I actually get it because I hit his gun square, hit the square front of his gun. So, time to move forward, time to be aggressive. I don't want him running away. I'd much rather him sit there and try and repair or something like that. But I can come around this corner a little angled, and if his gun can fire, make it a little more difficult for him. There he is. Come up over the hill angled. He's turning the turret. Yeah, you're never going to penetrate this one. Just fired the shell, hit his gun again. So I know his gun is definitely broken. And now I'm just going to harass him until my 128's loaded again. He is in a position where I don't think it'll be very difficult for him to penetrate my tank. My front of my hull is angled. Just going to wait for it to reload, and kablamo. Done. That's what the mouse is really, really good at, is just executing T-54s. It has a very powerful gun. It has a turret. It's more practically, I'd say it's more useful than the Jagdtiger because it's just so much more flexible. It can fill the same role as the Jagdtiger, but it does it in a way more flexible platform. It is slower, but it has a turret, and it has more effective armor, because from the sides, I mean, getting flanked in this thing is a big deal, but it's not the end of the world because you can actually quickly angle, and you don't need much of an angle to bounce shells. And at long range, you probably will bounce a shell just flat from the side. And also, just it can't be said enough how much a turret means, you know, especially a well-armored turret. Now, granted, it is the weakest part of the tank, the front of the turret, but it still gets the job done plenty good enough. Now, there's a Panther II over here who's engaging with an IS-4. That's not usually a battle the Panther II will win. So I pop up around the corner, go for the side shot, knock out the IS-4. Yay! And now we were in the process of capping their zone, but the mouse is actually going to move out of the zone, and I'm going to go over there and take his place. But we first got to get out of this river because, you know, like I've said plenty of times, the mouse is very slow, and water certainly doesn't help. Although that being said, it does seem to move okay in water. Ooh, there's another enemy tank here. It's another T-54, and he's trying to move up on this mouse. So I'm going to try and move as quickly as possible up onto the road where I know he's going to have to go and try and knock him out. Ooh, just fired. I can see him. There he is. Rip. Actually, he was facing me, but, you know, right through the upper glacis, no problem. And the T-54 is ripped. So now I'm going to move over into the cap circle. The mouse is actually, the allied mouse is actually going to move out of the cap circle. I think his goal was to move to their spawn and try and cut off anyone else who's spawning, which is not a bad idea. So since he's going that way, I'm going to face the other spawn. However, they do only have one player left, so it's very unlikely that we'll lose the game at this point. just going to come up over here. I'm going to sit in this cap and basically make the enemy come to me. And we're going to skip forward a little bit because not a lot interesting happens for the next minute or so. So let's cut to the chase, shall we? Basically, all that happened was the last enemy spawned and he was knocked out, but it happened so far away from me that not much to show. But so we won pretty handily. The real thing was that once the Mouses get into the fray, it's very difficult for the Russian and American teams to sort of push you out. But the key is you got to get there. The other tanks on your team need to make it so that once you get there, you're able to just push on through and win. The Maus is kind of the win condition that the German teams have been lacking for, well, ever since ground forces sort of came in at the 8.0 battle rating. But now the Germans have a win condition. Now, it's not to say everything's balanced, you know, but it's better than it used to be. So let's move on to the next part of the review, shall we? So here we are in a realistic battle on Kursk. And Kursk was a map I really wanted to get in the Maus because I wasn't quite sure how it would work. And from what I can tell, the Maus is actually very good on Kursk. What I was worried about was that it's so slow that it may just never get to the combat. But that's not quite the case. A nice hit on the T-54. It looks like he ran into the shell more like. But because the thing about the Maus is it's just its speed. That's its real drawback. If the thing could go maybe 35, then it would be just really, really OP. It would be too strong. That was kind of funny. I actually hit the IS-3 with the... that was close. But he gets knocked out, so I guess it doesn't matter. If a Maus could go 35 kilometers an hour, it would be a very, very different machine. Borderline, well, not borderline, it would be brokenly overpowered. So I'm glad it doesn't. However, it going 20, and 20 is not even, according to my sources, not even like the accurate number. According to, you guessed it, Wikipedia, the Maus's top speed was actually 13 kilometers an hour. However, it was the design called for a top speed of 20 kilometers an hour. But I feel like it's sort of unreasonable to get a 200-ton, well, 188-ton tank going 20 kilometers an hour. 13 seems way more reasonable to me for some reason. There's another IS-4. The IS-4 and the Maus are going to have some serious power struggles, I feel like, at the 8.0 battle rating. Because the Maus is all about the armor. The IS-4 is about a little bit more than armor, but armor is definitely the way it makes its money. And I still sort of am of the opinion that the IS-4 might be the most practically well-armored tank in the game. And that's primarily because of all the sloping and things like that. The Maus has a sort of a quote-unquote weak spot at the front of the turret where the armor's only 220 millimeters. And the IS-4 has some very difficult weak spots to deal with. However, I have seen it done where you hit an IS-4 sort of in the front or side of the turret and with an HE shell, and you'll hit the ammo rack stored in the side, which, not very good for the IS-4. However, the same can be said for the Maus. Now, I've only had it work with the ISU-152, where I fired, and there we go. Nice hit on the IS-3. Where I fired an HE shell into the front of a Maus's turret, and no matter how angled the turret is, the shell will actually explode and then detonate the ammo rack and the fuel tanks located, well, fuel tanks, I think they're fuel tanks, the radiator and all that stuff that's in the side walls of the tank in front of the turret. So that's the classic weakness of rear-mounted turrets and center-mounted turrets, is that if an HE shell blows up on the turret face, it's very likely to damage lots of components inside the tank, just because the shell, the blast and the fragments are going to go down into the roof of the tank, and it can certainly penetrate that. Because the roofs of tanks are generally somewhere between 40, 50, maybe 60 millimeters. So it's not a lot when it comes to a 152 millimeter high explosive shell. So that's something to watch out for in your Maus. However, I haven't seen that many people, well, I mean, I haven't seen that many people driving ISU 152s, primarily because it's at a 6.7 battle rating. ISU 152 shouldn't ever see mouses unless it's paired up with a tank or in a lineup where 8.0 battle ratings are possible. But in my opinion, the ISU 152 might be the most effective tank at destroying the mouse from any range. And that's primarily because the HE shell, if you hit the front of the turret, you'll knock the tank out, or at least set it on fire, or blow it up, or just all kinds of bad things. My next favorite would be probably the IS-4. You could go with the M103, and I don't think you'd be wrong. However, the thing about the M103 is it gets all that, I mean, I guess the AP shell would work as well, but the heat shell is primarily what people will be trying to use. And yeah, it has great penetration, but the mouse, an angled mouse, you could not hurt with the M103's heat shell. The AP shell, unlikely either, because angled, the mouse will be in excess of 270 millimeters of armor probably. If, well angled, it certainly will be. So you're left with, how do you deal with an angled mouse at range, let's say? Well, high explosive shell off the front of the turret is a good way to do it, since you aren't going to be able to penetrate a mouse that's angled. Just not going to happen. So you need to use an HE shell, and the issue you have with the 122 millimeter HE shells is in the test drive mode, and in my experience, it's not a big enough caliber HE shell to actually damage the tank. And now, what I just did right there was kind of important. All right, we have all these tanks lined up on this ridge, but we don't want to go over because the enemy are just waiting for us. So what does a mouse do? A mouse should just go over the hill. Right? I go over the hill. Now I've taken all these hits. All those tanks are reloading, and the T-54, for example, can drive up the slope, shoot at enemy tanks. The Jagdtiger to my right can go drive over, shoot at a tank. And the mouse to my way off to the left can keep moving and keep flanking, and is likely to come up behind tanks that may not be reloaded yet. And that's something that the Germans haven't had at the 8.0 battle rating. The Russians have had it the whole time. You have the IS-4. When you need someone to go forward and take some hits, you send the IS-4 in. And a T-54 can do it as well with the turret. But the Germans really haven't had that. A Jagdtiger doesn't want to be this close. A mouse doesn't mind being this close. It's better if it wasn't, but if you have to pick a tank, the mouse is the one you want going over the hill first, because it's very likely to take hits and not be damaged. Now I think the IS-4 actually is what knocked out my gun. But at the end of the day, I don't care a whole lot about losing my gun. I can just back up and repair it, and my teammates can move forward and knock out the enemies that knocked my gun out. So the mouse is very much so a team player tank, and it's a very, very strong tank. I'm very glad that they added it into the game, and I think a lot of people who were worried about it because of misgivings from World of Tanks are going to be pleasantly surprised by this machine, because it behaves very much so like the mouse was supposed to behave. Right? In World of Tanks, you can always, at least tanks that will see the mouse, can always access shells that have ridiculous penetration. In War Thunder, that's not the case. Like the E100, forgot what the penetration value is exactly on its AP round, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 250, 260. And that's considered bad. That's considered borderline not usable. I always found it to be okay, but with the accuracy of the gun and things like that, I understand why people say it's not good enough. Now, with the mouse, the gun has about 250 millimeters penetration, and that's perfectly good in War Thunder. And there aren't many tanks that have greater than 260 or so penetration at suicidal ranges. So, and you can certainly angle this thing, and it's not like in World of Tanks where you can just access a shell with 380 millimeters of penetration and get away with some, in my opinion, sort of iffy, I'm not going to say iffy game mechanics, but iffy scenarios where a heat shell would penetrate. I think War Thunder does a very good job in modeling how a heat shell actually works and things like that. Now, in World of Tanks, a very good mouse driver can soak up all kinds of punishment. But you just won't see the type of penetration guns in War Thunder that you do in World of Tanks. So I feel like the mouse already has an advantage in War Thunder. And also War Thunder is a game that's not driven by armor, but armor means a lot. Because the ability to be one-shot is so easy that tanks with large amounts of armor are pretty valuable because they can take hits and deliver hits. You know, the IS-4 is a prime example. The IS-4 in World of Tanks isn't that good. But in War Thunder, it's really good. You know, the mouse is kind of the same way. Where there's misgivings of it in World of Tanks, but it works really well in War Thunder. And I feel like part of that's because it's just modeled differently and, in my opinion, modeled better. All that being said, a mouse can be one-shot. ISU 152s can do it. I've been able to do it with a T-54 through the, in this orientation, the right side of the turret. If you're looking at the mouse, the left side, to the left of the gun, because there's the 75mm gun's ammo rack there. And if you penetrate that part of the turret, you can certainly kill it. Now, you have to be at relatively close ranges to manage that. And at this range, for example, I have zero fear of any of these tanks. It's just, I just don't care because, quite honestly, there isn't a gun at this range that can penetrate me except for maybe an M103 through my turret. And there aren't any M103s on the enemy team right now as far as I can tell. So it's very likely that I'm perfectly safe like this. Even unangled, I'd be perfectly safe. Trying to nail this SU-122. Trying to use the sort of zeroing mechanism, but I wasn't very good at it. Because the ISU-122 is a tank I can definitely kill from this range very easily. Jagdtiger less so. I need to nail its lower plate or loop a shell over into its upper glacis and get lucky. Oh, he's back. Ugh. Hit him. Oh, that's sad. If it hit maybe a few inches to the right, it likely would have knocked him out. But I really have, in a mouse, like in this situation, you have zero fear of any type of enemy fire. The only fear you have is enemy planes or things like that. You know, the mouse is one of the few tanks that the ZSU 57-2 is actually really going to struggle to kill. The ZSU can kill basically any other German tank, and most American tanks as well. Actually, all of them, I think. But I don't think it can actually kill the mouse. At least it's never happened to me, and I've run into ZSUs. They can knock out your gun, but they can't penetrate your turret. Nice little engine fire there, or transmission fire rather, on the Jagdtiger. So, you know, there's just one less thing to worry about. I mean, oh, bad network connection. That was awkward. But this game is basically wrapped up. The mouses have rolled forward. We're just slowly pushing them out. You know, a lot of their tanks are dead. See, and that's something I don't know. How did my first shell penetrate his lower glacis, set him on fire, and then I fired the same shell from, well, I mean, I might have adjusted my sights, or he might have backed up or something like that, but it seemed like it was the exact same shot, and I went super high and hit his gun mantlet of all things. But, you know, whatever. But now it's just time to keep moving forward. Oh, year 2, definitely don't want to be in front of that one. And this is where, you know, the mouse really doesn't have any anti-air capability. It doesn't have a machine gun as far as I can tell in the game. The actual mouse originally had no machine gun. It's called, the prototype, like the designs didn't have any machine guns, but then they added a 30 cal for anti-air, and they added some submachine gun ports and things like that to give it some type of close defensive capabilities, because the idea was the mouse would be supporting infantry attacks, and that would indicate that it's going to run into infantry, because you don't charge infantry at tanks. You generally charge them at, well, infantry. So it makes sense for it to have a machine gun. I believe that's what those ports on the side of the turret are, and the back of the turret are actually machine gun ports. But it doesn't have any machine guns in-game, and it doesn't really need them anyway. At this battle rating, with this slow a turret traverse, machine gun wouldn't be that useful anyway. But we're just kind of moseying our way forward into the cap circle. The enemy are pretty beaten here. However, we will have a little bit of a scare. I mean, there's plenty of enemy players left, and they could be jumping into planes to come deal with us. But, like I said in the beginning, I wasn't sure how the mouse would do on Kursk, just because it's so slow. But, you know, Kursk is actually a really good map for it. You can keep people back at ranges that favor you, but also when you move forward, you can be that just block that the enemy team just shoots at, and your allied tanks can keep pushing forward. You could basically soak up all the damage for them so that they don't have to. And that's something that on a lot of maps is very difficult. And that's really the mouse's role in the team. Its role is to go forward. And even though it's not great at engaging targets at close range, simply because the turret doesn't turn all that fast and the machine isn't that mobile, it does have the most armor in the game, basically. And it does have a very potent gun on a turret. That's the key thing. It's on a turret. And it has the best chance of surviving the push there. So I would say it's important for the mouse to be the tank that moves forward, while the Jagdtigers of the world, the Ferdinands, the Panther IIs, and the King Tigers are in sort of the hybrid role. To me, the King Tigers kind of fill a medium tank responsibility. They're supporting the advancing mouses. The Jagdtigers are supporting the entire advance. The Panther IIs are almost scouts / harassing mediums who are cleaning up, you know, very wounded enemy tanks. There is actually like a team dynamic developed within the German 8.0 battle rating that wasn't there before. With the Russians, you've always had it. You've had T-54s, which are your jack of all trades. IS-4s move forward, and you really haven't needed tank destroyers. But you had things like, you know, Su-100s and things like that to be, you know, long-range sniping tank destroyers. But T-54 can fill that role, and the IS-4 can almost fill that role. So you've always had team dynamic. And once we get tank destroyers for the Americans, you'll have that team dynamic there as well. So now that the Germans kind of have this team dynamic, it's going to make German gameplay at 8.0 way more compelling, and I think more balanced. But anyway, let's move on to the next part of the review, shall we? Alright, so opinion time. What do I think of the mouse? I think it should be clear from the replays and from just looking at this tank that I really like this tank. Now, I don't think it'll be for everyone simply because of how slow it is. It's incredibly slow. But the key thing is it's a German tank that has exceptional armor at its battle rating. The armor is what makes this thing tick, and I really love machines that have plenty of armor and go forward, that are kind of aggressive. I don't mind being slow. And like, for example, my favorite tank in World of Tanks is the T-95. Right? I don't mind being slow. I just love having armor. And War Thunder is a game where armor is very important because of how easy it is to get one shot if you don't have it. The mouse, it's basically a Jagdtiger with a turret and a hell of a lot more armor, and you basically, you know, cut the top speed by about a third. So I really like it. The play style for this tank has got to be go forward. I think that if you sit back and snipe, you can win, and you might win. But the issue is that this tank, it generally works best when it's pushing the enemy out of positions, when it's the center of attention. You saw in the realistic battle how I poked over the hill and immediately got shot. And I took 0 damage. I lost my guns. But my crew were fine. No other component took damage. The flip side of me going over that hill was that my allies were able to go over the hill, and then they subsequently killed a lot of enemy tanks while I repaired my gun. So that's the job of the mouse. There isn't another tank for the Germans that can be at the front line and take those hits for the rest of the team. It's got to be the mouse, and it's completely deserving of the 8.0 battle rating. There aren't many German tanks that deserve to be at rank 5. This one does. And the thing I've seen in games is that the enemy team will be winning, like let's say in a simulator battle, the Russian or American team will be winning until the Mouses get there, and then it comes down to, can the Mouses push the objective out? If they can push the enemy team out of the objective, automatic win, right? Because then they just hold the objective, the supporting tanks move up, and a new battle line is established, and the Russian or American tanks never ever get near the cap again. That's just been my experience in this machine, and I've done it, and I've had it done to me, where we are winning really hard, or we're losing really hard. So if I'm the Americans or Russians, we're winning really hard, and then all of a sudden we just never go near the cap zone again because we all just die because under a hail of mouse shots and Jagdtigers and stuff, because the Mouses finally got there and took the objective. Alternatively, on the German teams, I've had games where we're just losing horrendously, and then all of a sudden myself and a couple other tanks, or the Mouses on our team, if I'm not playing the Mouse, roll into the cap circle and laugh at the enemy tanks who try and come at us. Now, you will get bombed every once in a while, and bombing is sort of a weakness for this tank, even though it does have very thick armor. Landing a bomb on this tank is most of the time how you get knocked out. It's just someone bombed you. Something to note, though, T-54s can kill you frontally through the turret at close range. Medium range, not so much. Not with the upgraded ammunition, because I haven't had a chance to really test that, because I don't actually have that ammunition yet. But the key thing is you get to a position that you want to be in for a while, or alternatively that you need to be in for a while. Angle the tank towards your threats, angle the turret, and then when you're ready to fire, turn the turret, fire, turn it back. Right? This tank should always be angled towards your opponents unless you're advancing directly at them, in which case it's not a bad idea to angle the turret even though the hull is going straight. Because the hull will be fine. The turret is what you want to protect. And even a heat shell from an M103 probably won't penetrate this upper glacis because of how sloped it is, right? The lower plate even probably less so, because it's going to be coming down at it, and that's going to increase this angle. So, general playstyle for the Mouse, go forward with support. Don't be the lone Mouse, because then you'll just get swarmed. This tank is not mobile enough to deal with multiple threats. It needs to have one target it wants to shoot, and enough tanks around it where the other targets, if there are some, can't just mob it. Right? It needs some support. But that's also what the supporting tanks like the Panther II and the Jagdtiger are for. They blast those tanks trying to come up on this boy. So that's playstyle. That's my opinion. I really like it. I think you will too. If you're grinding rank 5s, machines for Germans, people always ask me, and I've always been kind of wishy-washy, because I can see someone arguing the Jagdtiger 105. I can see people arguing the Jagdtiger, and I like both. However, from this point forward, I think I will always argue that the Mouse is the first rank 5 German tank you should get. Primarily because it's just better than the others, right? It's almost regardless of whether you prefer the tank destroyers over the heavy tanks. The Mouse is the Jagdtiger plus the Jagdtiger with a whole buttload more armor on it. And yeah, you have to get used to the speed of the thing, but it's just a very good tank to start with, and it's just the best one. And a lot of times people want to grind for the best tank first. You know, a lot of people go for the T-54 first over the IS-4 because the T-54s are all very, very strong and arguably the best tanks in the game. I remember I got my T-54 and then immediately went for my IS-4, and I like my IS-4 better than I like my T-54s. But T-54 is probably the better tank, simply because it's faster, has good armor, and the gun is really, really good. But that's not taking anything away from the IS-4. It's extremely well armored as well. So, in my opinion, this is the tank you want to grind for first. The heavy tanks are all pretty good. All the Jagdtigers are pretty good in my opinion. And the Mouse is great. So, there you go. And that'll be it for this review. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or maybe suggestions for future reviews, I am falling behind on tanks to on those suggestions, but I'm working hard to catch back up. But anyway, just all that stuff in the comment section if you want. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'm Corny Swiss, and I'll see you next time.